The first thing you feel isn't the jolt of an alarm clock or the vibration of a phone under your pillow. It's the slow, creeping warmth of the sun hitting your eyelids, followed by the dry, earthy scent of cold wood ash from last night's fire. Your back is pressed against the packed dirt, and you can feel the slight ache of muscles that spent yesterday walking, not sitting in a chair. There is no schedule. No manager is waiting for an update, and no landlord is calculating your rent. For nearly 300,000 years, this was the start of a standard Tuesday for a human being. We lived, breathed, and thrived for hundreds of millennia without the concept of a job. No salary, no career path, and no 40-hour work week. But this creates a massive, gaping hole in our understanding of the human story. If your ancestors weren't spending 8 hours a day at a desk or a factory line just to earn the right to exist, what were they doing with all that time? We are looking at a missing time mystery on a global scale. We know they survived, but survival doesn't take 24 hours a day. So, where did the rest of the life go? Was it just a long, terrifying crawl through the dirt until they died at 20? That's the first lead most people follow when they try to solve this mystery. We've been told for generations that pre-industrial life was, as the philosopher Thomas Hobbes put it, nasty, brutish, and short. We imagine our ancestors as frantic, starving creatures, perpetually one missed berry away from extinction. In this version of the story, there was no free time, because every waking second was a desperate struggle to find calories or avoid predators. It's a clean explanation, but it has one major problem. The evidence doesn't support it. When we look at the physical record of how these people lived, the constant terror theory starts to fall apart. If they were truly spending every second in a panic, we wouldn't see the elaborate care they took with things that had nothing to do with survival. But if life wasn't a constant nightmare, was it the opposite? Did they just spend 300 centuries sitting around in a state of bored, prehistoric lethargy? This is our second false lead, the idea of the lazy savage. Some people imagine that without the progress of modern work, humans were basically just decorative mammals, waiting for the day to end. Yet, the tools they left behind tell a story of incredible focus and intent. They didn't just find rocks. They spent hours knapping flint into blades so thin they're sharper than modern surgical scalpels. They didn't just find clothes. They tanned hides using complex chemical processes that required days of attention. They were clearly doing something, but it wasn't employment. So, if it wasn't constant work and it wasn't total laziness, what was the rhythm of a day that belonged entirely to them? Could the answer be hidden in the few places on Earth where that rhythm never stopped? In the 1960s, a researcher named Marshall Solins began looking at data that would turn the entire field of anthropology upside down. He studied groups like the Jews/Hoansi people of the Kalahari Desert, people who lived in a way that closely mirrored the hunter-gatherer lifestyles of our ancestors. What he found was a bombshell. While the average modern worker is tied to a desk for 40 or 50 hours a week, these primitive hunters and gatherers were only spending about 15 to 20 hours a week on what we would call work, the actual procurement of food and shelter. Solins famously called them the original affluent society. He argued that they were affluent not because they had much, but because they wanted little and had everything they needed. They had solved the economic problem of survival in just a few hours a day. But if the work only took 3 hours a day, what happened to the other 13 hours of sunlight? This is where the mystery gets interesting. When researchers like Richard Lee lived among these groups, they noticed that the free time wasn't empty, it was social. For a hunter-gatherer, your social network is your insurance policy. There are no banks, so you invest your time in people. You spend hours talking, grooming, sharing stories, and strengthening bonds. This wasn't just fun, it was a survival strategy. If you share your meat today, someone else will share theirs with you next month when your hunt fails. This means a huge chunk of the pre-job day was spent in what we might call radical leisure, an intense, active form of being together that modern humans have almost entirely lost. We call it hanging out, but for them, it was the core of their existence. Why, then, do we still feel like they were less healthy than us? If they had all this free time and a social paradise, wouldn't their bodies show the strain of a primitive life? To find the truth, we have to look at the bones. This is where the investigation takes a dark turn for the modern world. Anthropologists like Mark Nathan Cohen have compared the skeletons of hunter-gatherers to the early farmers who replaced them. The results are startling. The hunter-gatherers were often taller, had better teeth with fewer cavities, and showed fewer signs of stress markers in their bone growth. When humans shifted from hunting and gathering to jobs in the form of farming, our health actually plummeted. We got shorter, our diets became less diverse, and we started suffering from repetitive motion injuries. The mystery of what they did all day starts to look less like a tragedy and more like a period of peak human health. But did this health extend to their minds, or were they just physically fit and intellectually blank? If they were just hanging out for 12 hours a day, why did they bother creating some of the most stunning art in human history? Consider the Chauvet Cave in France. Over 30,000 years ago, people didn't just scribble on walls. They used charcoal and ochre to create massive, sophisticated galleries of lions, rhinos, and horses. They used the flickering light of torches to create the illusion of movement, a prehistoric version of cinema. Someone had to find the pigments. Someone had to learn the anatomy of the animals. Someone had to spend hours in the dark, practicing the curve of a lion's back. You don't do that if you're struggling for every breath. You do that when you have an abundance of time and a deep desire to express your place in the universe. Art wasn't a hobby for them, it was a primary activity. Could it be that the job we think is so essential to human nature is actually a biological glitch? Think about the objects found in the Blombos Cave in South Africa, dating back 75,000 years. Researchers found tiny seashells, painstakingly drilled with holes to be worn as beads. Making one bead is a chore. Making a necklace is a project that takes days. These beads don't help you catch a gazelle. They don't keep you warm. They are a useless luxury that consumed hours of human labor. Yet, these beads are found all over the ancient world. This suggests that a huge part of the day was spent on identity work. Before we had LinkedIn profiles or job titles, we defined ourselves by the things we made, the patterns we painted on our skin, and the stories we told through our adornments. We spent our days becoming ourselves rather than becoming employees. But how did they keep track of all this without a clock or a calendar? This brings us to a clue that many people overlook: the social clock of the fire. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent decades studying the conversations of the Jew/Hoansi, specifically comparing what they talked about during the day versus what they talked about at night. During the day, talk was practical: where the water was, who was moving where, how to fix a tool. It was business talk. But at night, around the fire, the conversation changed. It became about stories, myths, and memories. The firelight created a space where the work of the day was banished, and the work of the culture began. They spent their nights building a shared mental world. This wasn't a side activity, it was the mechanism that held the group together. Without a boss to tell them what to do, they used stories to align their values and goals. If this life was so balanced and filled with leisure, why did we ever stop? That is the biggest mystery of all. Why would any rational human trade a 15-hour work week and a diverse diet for a 60-hour week of pulling weeds in a wheat field? The investigation points toward a great trap. About 10,000 years ago, the agricultural revolution began. It wasn't a choice made overnight. It was a slow, creeping commitment. Farming allowed us to have more children, which meant we needed more food, which meant we needed more land and more labor. Suddenly, we were caught in a cycle. We couldn't go back to hunting and gathering because there were now too many of us to be supported by the wild. We had traded our time for security, but the security required a job. We built the cage, walked inside, and locked the door behind us. But did we lose our ancient rhythms entirely, or are they still screaming beneath the surface? Look at how we sleep. For most of history, humans didn't sleep in one 8-hour block. Records studied by historian Roger Kirch suggest that before the Industrial Revolution, people had first sleep and second sleep. They would wake up in the middle of the night for an hour or two of quiet reflection, talking, or intimacy before going back to bed. This was a natural, biological rhythm. When we forced ourselves into the 9-to-5 job structure, we hacked our sleep into a single, efficient block to maximize our productivity. We didn't just lose our days to jobs, we lost our nights too. Our modern struggle with insomnia and burnout might just be the ghost of our hunter-gatherer ancestors trying to reclaim that middle-of-the-night freedom. Does that mean our ancestors were living in a literal paradise? Not exactly. The mystery has its dark corners. While they had more leisure, they also had higher infant mortality and no defense against infection. A simple tooth abscess that we fix in 20 minutes could be a death sentence for them. They lived with a level of physical vulnerability that would terrify a modern person. But it's important to separate danger from work. They lived dangerous lives, but they lived full lives. Their days were packed with sensory input, social complexity, and physical movement. They weren't employed, but they were never unemployed either. They were constantly engaged with the world around them in a way that modern labor often prevents. But if they were so engaged, why don't we see more evidence of their leisure objects? The answer is as simple as it is frustrating for archaeologists. They used materials that rot. We find the stone tools and the shell beads, but we miss the wooden carvings, the woven baskets, the elaborate feather headdresses, and the intricate sand drawings. We are looking at the ruins of a world that was likely exploding with color and craftsmanship. Imagine a group of people spending an entire afternoon weaving a basket not just to hold berries, but to tell a story through the pattern of the fibers. That isn't work as we define it. It's an integration of life and art. They didn't have a work-life balance because their work was their life. There was no line where one ended and the other began. Could the secret of their free time be hidden in the way they hunted? We often imagine hunting as a high-speed chase, but for humans, it was often a persistence hunt. This is a grueling, hours-long process of walking an animal to death in the heat. It sounds like a job, but researchers have noted that it's also a deeply intellectual task. You are reading the ground like a book, interpreting the wind, and predicting the mind of another species. It is an intense, flow-state activity. When the hunt is over, it's followed by days of rest and celebration. This pulse of high intensity followed by deep relaxation is how our bodies were designed to function. Our modern world of constant, medium-intensity stress for 8 hours a day is a biological nightmare that our ancestors would have found incomprehensible. So, what is the final verdict on the mystery of the pre-job era? The evidence suggests that for 99% of our history, humans lived in a world where time was not a commodity to be sold. We spent our days in a rotating cycle of social grooming, high-level craftsmanship, persistence movement, and deep, fireside storytelling. We worked less, slept differently, and invested more in our relationships than we do today. We weren't poor because the concept of poverty requires a system of wealth to compare it to. We were simply there, fully present in our environments and our communities. We didn't have jobs because we hadn't yet invented the idea that a human being's time could belong to someone else. But if that's true, what does it say about the world we've built for ourselves? We often look back at the Stone Age with a sense of pity, as if those people were just waiting for us to invent the office cubicle so they could finally be productive. But the investigation suggests the opposite. They had the one thing that the wealthiest people in the modern world are currently desperate to buy back: their own time. They lived in a world where the sun was the only clock and the group was the only boss. They weren't saving for retirement, because they were living the life people usually wait until retirement to enjoy. They were the masters of the now, and we are the heirs to the later. Is it possible that our modern obsession with productivity is actually a form of collective amnesia? We have forgotten that for the vast majority of our existence, being productive meant making sure your friends were happy and your belly was full, and then stopping. There was no drive to do more, just for the sake of more. This is perhaps the most uncomfortable clue in the whole mystery. Our ancestors weren't behind us on a timeline of progress. They were on a completely different path. They chose a path of stability and leisure, and we chose a path of expansion and labor. We can't go back to the cave, but understanding what they did all day forces us to ask a difficult question. Did we actually advance, Or did we just get better at staying busy? But how do we reconcile this with the incredible comforts of the modern world? We have medicine, air conditioning, and the internet. We can communicate across the globe in seconds. Our ancestors would likely look at our world as a place of magic and miracles. But they would also likely be horrified by the cost of those miracles. They would see people who are physically safe but socially isolated, people who have plenty of food but no time to sit and eat it with their friends, and people who have careers but no sense of what their life actually means outside of a paycheck. The mystery of their time reveals the tragedy of ours. We have traded the sovereignty of our days for the security of our systems. So, if the case is closed, what is the takeaway for the person watching this while dreading their commute tomorrow? The mystery of what humans did before jobs isn't just a historical curiosity, it's a mirror. It shows us that the way we live now is a tiny, recent, and highly experimental deviation from the human norm. We are the outliers. We are the ones living this strange life. For almost all of time, a human being was someone who woke up when they were rested, worked until they were done, and spent the rest of the day simply being a human. We are the only version of our species that has ever tried to do the opposite. But what if the most important thing they did wasn't the art or the hunting, but the resting? We often treat doing nothing as a sin, a waste of precious potential. But for 300,000 years, doing nothing was the point. It was the space where culture was created, where children were taught, and where the human mind was allowed to wander and dream. By filling every second of our lives with tasks, we have essentially evicted the very thing that made us human in the first place. We have become a species of doers who have forgotten how to be. The mystery of the pre-job era isn't about what they did, it's about what we've stopped doing. Could it be that the real work of humanity isn't what happens in an office, but what happens around a metaphorical fire? We still seek out those ancient rhythms. We go camping to sit around fires and tell stories. We go hiking to feel the persistence of the walk. We make art as a hobby to feel the joy of creation. We are constantly trying to sneak back into the 300,000-year-old life through the back door of our weekends. We call it vacation, but our ancestors just called it afternoon. We are a species of displaced hunter-gatherers, trying to figure out how to live in a world that wants us to be machines. But if we can't go back, how do we live with this knowledge? The verdict of history is that the agricultural trap is permanent. We can't support 8 billion people on berries and gazelles. The jobs are here to stay. But perhaps the solution to the mystery isn't to burn down the system, but to reclaim the pre-job mindset wherever we can. To realize that our value isn't tied to our productivity. To understand that an hour spent talking to a friend isn't wasted time, but a return to our biological roots. To remember that for most of history, success wasn't a promotion. It was a long, slow morning with the people you love. Does this mean the mystery of what humans did all day is finally solved? In a way, they lived. They lived fully, intensely, and socially. They filled their time with the things that make life worth living, rather than the things that make a system function. They were the architects of a world where time was a gift, not a debt. And while we may be trapped in the job era for the foreseeable future, the memory of that older world still lives in our DNA, waiting for the sun to hit our eyelids and for us to remember that we were never meant to be this busy. The investigation into our past always leads back to the same uncomfortable truth about our present. We like to believe that we are the pinnacle of human achievement, that every step of history has been a climb toward a better way of living. But the skeletons and the cave paintings and the 15-hour work weeks of the Jew/Hoansi suggest that we might have peaked a long time ago. We have traded our autonomy for an endless list of tasks, and we have called it progress. We are the first humans in history who have to schedule a meeting just to see our own families. But even if the case of the missing hours is closed, there are other mysteries waiting in the shadows of our history. For instance, what happened to the other species of humans who lived alongside us, who also didn't have jobs, and who might have spent their days in even stranger ways? We were not the only ones who knew the secret of the original affluent society. Neanderthals and Denisovans were there too, living their own versions of the job-free life. What did they do while we were busy painting lions? But that is a mystery for another time. A clue that leads into a different kind of darkness. You will spend approximately 90,000 hours of your life at work. That is roughly 1/3 of your entire existence dedicated to a system that didn't exist for 99% of your history. Your ancestors spent that same amount of time watching the stars, perfecting the curve of a bone flute, and listening to the breathing of their children. While you measure your worth by the impact of your career, your biology is still waiting for the day to begin at dawn and end when the fire goes out. You are a biological masterpiece designed for a world of leisure, currently living in a world of deadlines. And the most haunting part of this reality is that you are likely too tired to even notice what has been stolen from you. If you've ever felt like your soul is in a place it doesn't belong, now you know why. If you want to dive deeper into the mysteries of what we've lost and who we used to be, you might want to stick around for the next investigation. What do you think is the most unhuman part of your modern workday? Let me know in the comments.